I just clicked the go live button.
Unless you are. Yes.
There she is. We're almost live.
All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
For y'all.
So I click go live and it looks like it should be live. Yeah.
It says it is.
Live from the Plutopia News Network, this is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Our guest this evening is Ruth Glendinning, and the usual suspects are here, the not ready for cable news players. Scoop Sweeney, that's me. Susie Sheeler, that's her. And that guy up there, that's John Lebkowski. He's our designated driver this evening.
Am I?
You
Oh
are?
my God. You know, I got to tell you, I've been drinking. I'm not sure you should let me drive.
Oh, gee, I'm ashamed of you as he drinks his own.
Ruth, where's your drink? No
I don't
martinis?
I'm so boring. I don't
don't drink either.
More
This
Hey,
is
they're
really not
drinking.
boring. People who don't drink are much more exciting than people who do.
I'm gonna
Well,
have
they can
to
work- they can
disagree.
remember things.
So how are you?
I'm great. How are y'all? I've been quite busy since we last chatted.
There's a lot
Yes,
of-
well, we want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's been a pretty.
What are you doing?
What aren't I doing? I'm doing everything I can to convince the world and remind them that that language is our most powerful technology.
Thank you.
That until we can put it and describe what we're feeling and externalize it, nothing happens at all. It's all just this potential that's rolling around, you know. And
So what do you think about language itself on its gendered language? That I'm just going to go there.
Yeah, no, and I think you should, because one of the topics that I write about a lot is women's work. And I specifically call that out because it is work that's been traditionally done by women, but it's a non-gendered phrase. It is all of, and I call this out when I write about it, it is all the work that is invisible and invaluable, undervalued and essential to make life worth living. That it is this transformational space. And that was apparent to me and to any woman and to any sentient person in the world. And then COVID just kind of the boom, here it all is, right? It's like, P.S. You have to earn, you have to learn, you have to predict the future, you have to remember the past, and be sure and be present. You're like, okay, So once you get all that done, if you could, let us know how to do it, but we don't want to pay you for it. And you're like, okay, this is not working for me.
Right.
And what I love is this generation coming up is just going like, yeah, no, that's stupid. We're not going to do that.
And it's pissing government off.
I couldn't be happier. It couldn't happen to a less essential institution. And so the whole idea, like for me, language has always been, I've always been a word nerd, and I, it's this transformational magical tool that engages people. And it makes people curious, but it also gives them the tools to answer that curiosity. So it doesn't just get you excited and then leave you. It's more like, here's some ways to actually bring that forward. Everything that comes to me comes through intuition, dreams, and divine downloads. And what my job is to move it from the ethereal to the material. And language is the most effective way to do that.
On social media, I run across a lot of invented new words. Apparently, there's a new language developing out there that I may or may not understand. Have you encountered that? And what's your opinion of people making up new words that may or may not have any meaning?
I am so pro that it's unbelievable. I have now finished volume 4 of the Lexicon of Future. I was close to the end of volume 4, and I was like, I want to get it done before we have this podcast, because it is taking words that there's a couple of things here. One, when you get to the archaic meaning of words, they tend to be more human-centered. When you've modernized words, you've stripped out the humanity and turned it into this commodity, because it's all about how do we, make money on it? How do we turn it into this coin rather than an experience? And so, and then this last volume I finished, the last word was zebra. And everyone's like, well, I know what a zebra is, but in modern language, it is the answer to how do we move out of the space of only supporting unicorns. Yeah, there you go, Z is for zebra. And because unicorns have been this, idealized type of corporation where they bring up lots of money and there's a few people that really benefit from it. But the reality is the zebra is actually real, as the Zebras Unite people who created it, as you can see in the photo. That the whole idea is, why pursue an imaginary creature and keep throwing all these resources into it when there's these really good zebras that are around that are actually doing the work.
I actually saw a zebra the other day.
Yeah, it's,
there's a few of them around. If you drive through Texas, every now and then you'll see a zebra on the other side of a fence.
Well, the funniest, I think, for me, when I lived in Oklahoma, I was shocked to find that there was an elephant rescue there. And I'm like, why are there elephants in Oklahoma? Like, super random. But it's a town that used to be a winter home of circuses. So they ended up, I have all kinds of weird facts. It's my job.
And Texas is kind of a circus.
In so many ways, and somebody has to keep cleaning up after the elephants. It's a circus job. Yeah.
When you say lexicon of the future, sort of how does that work? When you say you're creating a lexicon for the future, how do you decide which terms are future relevant?
Well, I think that number one, we have to describe a different future than this flying car, bright, shiny object future that is very elitist and leaves a lot of people behind.
Hey, I want the flying car.
The Jetsons.
You can, if we could do Jetsons, that would be cool. But I've seen people drive on the ground. I do not want to be flying, sitting under the guy who spits tobacco out of his flying car.
Oh God!
Yeah, I'm serious.
Or has those flaps on the back with the chicks?
Oh yeah, exactly. But she'll have little wings, and so and so I have no problem with that being part of a future as an option. But to say that everyone has to be driven into that storyline, that we have to leave our humanity behind and all of the curiosities and foibles and mistakes and all of the experience that is inclusive. And so when I look at language, when I think about that, I never called myself a futurist because I thought you had to think about bright, shiny objects. And I'm like, well, that's not me. However, I have been tagged by a number of people who say, no, you're talking about a future most people actually are going to live. It's not sexy, it's not exciting, but it gives them a place at the table. My late husband was in a wheelchair, and I learned so much about accessibility and inclusion, about the power of technology as a means rather than an end, because technology doesn't end. So to pursue it in that way, you have to keep making it less and less available to people. So John, when we're talking about how do I find words, one, as I said, I get these intuitive downloads. I have just words that pop up for me, and I look at the trends in the language, and I think, okay, people need to have, it's like in marketing, you need something that is both new and familiar at the same time. People have to be able to imagine themselves using something. So that's where, like, something like Bitcoin or any kind of cryptocurrency, people know something has to change. They're clear on that. But to talk to people who are trying to put real food on the table and create a budget that is stable, they can't look at imaginary currency that might have a different value 3 days from now and end up paying $20,000 for a loaf of bread. It's like, okay, it's too abstract. And so language as a tool is a way to start crafting a shared story of future. is to say, here are some words. Let's see what happens with them. This is not carved in stone. This is, it's like written on water because it's on the internet. So it'll probably go away at some point. But it's been really interesting to me that as I've never expected to finish 4 volumes, but here I am, and the words are, it's giving you a way to have these words you're familiar, like using zebra as the example, but then to say, wait a minute, it contains a different story. It's more than just this striped horse, that I've seen on National Geographic or whatever.
Horse in striped pajamas.
Yes. And the funny thing is, they're starting to paint cows like zebras with stripes because it helps with the flies.
Oh, that's interesting.
Is that
why zebras have stripes? Because of the flies?
Yeah, you don't see a lot of people riding zebras, right? They're just like, it keeps everybody away. So they're like, that's okay.
I want to, something you said a minute ago made me think about a point I wanted to quickly make, and then we'll get back to that. But you see this picture?
Mm-hmm.
So this is from a movie called Things to Come. Oh. And these people are people of the future, and that future was the 1960s.
Oh.
So this is what people were supposed to be wearing in the 1960s, but we all know that people were wearing jeans and t-shirts instead.
Yeah, that was the 80s.
So this thing about shiny objects, this is like the shiny object version of the future. And some guy in the jeans and a t-shirt is like the reality of the future.
Well, if you look at some of the things that fashion designers have put forward as clothing, it looked very similar to that. And I don't know how futuristic it was.
Yeah, it's very constructed, and it presumed this whole way of living that would support that outfit. Jeans and a t-shirt have withstood because you can live in it. What's the livability of it? What's the sustainability? And it's always interesting to me because, I grew up watching the Jetsons and the Flintstones, and it was really, they had the same technology pretty much. It's like they use technologies like the mammoth trunk was to wash the dishes, and, and they had, they still had the basic needs met using pretty simple tools. And it's, I look at how we're living now, and, I've been in Austin on and off since 1980, and I know some of y'all have been here longer. And I think about what is the story that we're leaving behind to satisfy this very specific vision of the future that is meaningful culturally, socially, and financially to a very limited number of people. It's not sustainable for most people.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I think English is a living language, right? So it's going to change. But do you think that because it's spoken so widely that it will in fact become the language? And then apart from that, separate question, or maybe tied to emojis that we use now remind me very much of hieroglyphics. Are we going backwards here?
I don't think that we're going backwards. I think that, we're reaching back to move forward, where we're saying, what are the tools we need in order to express some complex? Because there's times I use emojis, the international signal for this conversation is over. It's like, thanks, we're done, right? Or when you don't really know what to say, and it's like, I would like to have an emoji that was laughing, rolling its eyes, and something like that. Generally, where I'm like, instead of saying, what the actual fuck are you talking about? So,
yes.
And I do agree. I think what's so interesting about English is that it's an amalgamation of so many cultures, that I've always felt that, we're fortunate it's at least for me, it's my primary language, because it's very confusing, and I admire people take it on as a second or third language because there's no really right. It's like this big junk drawer of language, right? And you're reaching.
Latin languages are all the same. I mean, one, you can easily jump to another, but English is like Greek.
Parts of it, you know.
Exactly.
But I do see it as this living tool. That's why I think of it as a technology. It's always adapting. You know, when you're like when you my friend Kent, his 8-year-old twins, you know, they watch YouTube a lot, and I'll start hearing language patterns they have. And it's really interesting because you see where they put the emphasis. And I've noticed, and you know, that there's a way of talking now, like that ends it with the, like if you're saying it'd be Ruth, everything's at the end. It's like this thing, like
Ruth,
it's like, yeah, but it's not snarky, you know. It's just kind of like this affectation that
really?
generation has. And so okay. So it's
I
just,
know what
so
you're
I
talking
like
about.
to, yeah, so it's a way to, you know, with the right word you can deliver so much. You can just, you can be very strategic, you can be very surgical in the way that you express language. And what I'm finding now is there's people under 20ish, you know, they want to complexify their language. They have these shortcuts, but they also, I know because I've gotten feedback from what I've written, and people are like, how do you know all these words? Like, I have some secret stash that they don't have access to, right? And the context and how just changing one word can change a whole feeling, because that's what we're doing, is we're seeking a way to engage feeling and to activate these invisible parts of ourself that aren't valued, you know, by this very transactional system.
Yeah, different cultures and subcultures seem to be wanting to have their own language. I know friends who speak Spanglish, and
Yes.
it's because they want to be unique and in their personal group. But it can be alienating to people who don't speak it or don't even know what it is. It's also something that I've seen is different generations use language in different way, even though they're speaking
Yes.
the same language. I encountered that with my grandmother, who was Choctaw. She was
Oh,
born
really? I didn't know that.
she was born in Indian Territory, educated at Indian girls' school.
Uh-huh.
And I would watch her. When I was a kid, I would spend a lot of time with her, and I watched her and her peers in the Choctaw neighborhood where she lived, and they were very specific with their language. And I talked to her about, you know, that they spoke in Choctaw, and I didn't speak it. I wish I had learned it. But I asked her about it. I said, why don't you speak English? She said, it's easier for us to communicate because we get our point across, where English is confusing to a lot of people. It means different things to different people. But in Choctaw, it's very specific. We know what they're saying.
You know, I worked with Choctaw Nation for a couple of years, and I still work with them, you know, on these larger projects that we're doing. And I took Choctaw. That was one of the, you were able to take the classes. And it was really interesting because it's a, you know, there's a, it's a feeling, as your grandmother was getting to. It's like that there was some implied meaning that couldn't be captured. There wasn't a word for it. You know, it was just a way that you presented it.
Yeah, she would say things like, what's the word for, and you would ask one of her friends, and they would tell her in Choctaw, and then they would tell her in English. She's like, oh, okay. And so they would need help with certain English words.
And it's really, you know, one of the, I read the book Sand Talk, and I highly recommend it if you haven't read it, by Tyson Yunkaporta. He's from New Zealand, and he talks about, you know, when people colonize, they remove the feminine story from language, and they make it a very colonial male story.
His story.
Yeah, and it's very gendered. Yeah, fantastic book. Highly recommend it. And it's, but of course, what I loved is, like, we're thinking about how are we going to decolonize our future? How are we going to clean up the trauma and we have to call it out first. We have to call out that how can you tell your story if your language doesn't include you? You know, if it's just this, you're speaking in a foreign language because you're not telling the full you're not allowing the full complexity of the feeling. And so it's a very, very, very powerful time we're in right now, because we actually can not only discern the nuance of it, we can activate the power. So we don't have to choose in that way. And, you know, the whole idea of not only who is telling the story, but how they're telling it. And are they included in it? And why do we have to open a vein and share our trauma with everybody in order to be heard? Because we'll get re-traumatized, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we have this, you know, the things I've done is like, I have these big meta things that I download, and that's too much for most normal people. I mean, that actually, you know, it's your capacity is full just trying to survive. So I just published article number 500 on Medium today. And it was the latest poem. I've written 292 poems since February 17th.
Wow.
And then the Lexicon of Future, I have 4 volumes since May, I think. But then I've also gone to the word trauma and broken it down by letter for the trauma response pattern. You know, so it's like I keep digging deeper and deeper to it, because if we can change the energy around our language, because that's what we really respond to, right? It's like, because you can see it with animals. You can say horrible things in the sweetest voice, and they're like, I love you so much. I hope that you're here forever and ever. And you see that, and it's like, so they're responding to the vibration, to the energy you have behind it. So wouldn't it be best if we could say great things beautifully? Yeah, this is the latest poem. And it's number 500. I just can't even believe, and that's since on February 16th, I had 77 posts, and today, on October 21st, I have 500. So it's been a fruitful year. And the whole idea is, how do we keep, you know, crafting language? How do we make it inclusive? How do we help people find themselves in it? Not so that they're having my experience, so that they're having their experience, you know? And that takes practice. People have to be ready to receive that. That's a lot. And so my job, as I see it, is to kind of keep creating new containers and saying, do you want a sip? Do you want to go swim in the ocean? I mean, how do you want to do it? It's all water, but it all has different experiences attached to it.
Do you have much interaction with the people who are reading your Medium blog?
I do. I actually get quite a bit of people connecting with me. A lot of the stuff around grassroots economics and kitchen table capitalism and household economics, I'm getting tons of interest from outside the United States, where people have already said, yeah, we're going to skip over all that kind of completely transactional deconstruct and go to where we're valuing humans as an investment, not as a cost. So I'm getting a lot of play from that. The poems, I've got a literary agent who has asked me to submit to her poems to her, so that might be something. And then today I had a conversation with somebody who I've known for about a year, who just got a huge grant to work on an e-learning game. And he wants me to work with him to craft language around that, so that kids in high school can actually start thinking about language differently and literally writing their future. So people, you know, I put it out there and people come back with some really great stuff.
You're working in a very confusing contemporary context where people are kind of going crazy.
Yes.
You know,
and some are not going crazy. They've already gone crazy.
They've gone crazy. Yeah.
Yes.
And we keep wondering how to break through that. You know, we had, Bucky Fuller's idea about the trim tab. And I kept thinking, well, our little Plutopia project here maybe could be a trim tab for trying to break through this sort of like weird media facade that's been emerging, some combination of social media, activity and the kinds of things that you're getting through more traditional media sources. And it's all, I think the Buddhist word for it is delusion. So breaking through delusion seems to be a critical need right now. And I'm not clear how to approach it. Have you thought about that very much?
Well, and that's what led to creating the overall site of Future Story Lab, is to say, one, we have to co-create stories. You can't colonize somebody with your vision, because if somebody tried to predict the next 5 years based on the last 5 years, seriously, do not follow that person anywhere. And one of the things I've talked about is that you need to create an ecosystem instead of an ecosystem. And that's actually been my most read piece on Medium by far, like thousands. And so it's this whole idea of, where are you in relation to other people? So when you're talking about this confluence of past, present, and future using a social media platform, you want to use the tools, the technology we have, but you have to put it into the right context and make sure it's accessible to people, that it's as inclusive as possible. And you do that by having diversity, just because like in nature, a monoculture doesn't survive. We need to make sure that we're having a diversity of lenses that people can try on and actually find themselves. And one of the downloads I got is that we're born into one of four questions. Is it true? Has it ever been true? Could it be true? And should it be true? Yeah, that's the one that's gotten the most play.
Okay, wait, say it again. What are the four things? Could it be true? Is it true?
Has it ever been true? Could it be true? And should it be true?
Okay.
So for instance, people born after 9/11, they were born into the question of should it be true? Because they have no evidence that anything that we grew up with ever really existed. They've seen 100% of their life has been consumed by the US has been at war for 100% of their life. They've never seen that people get to buy a house and keep it. They've never seen that you get a job and keep it. Everything is in flux. So should it be true? It's like, should we really trust these stories of a future when we can see with our own eyes that none of it is ever working out? Certainly not, for most people. So for what you need though is a mix of people born into different questions, because those who operate just on the should it be true, where it's all just this ethical story, they need to be grounded. They need to understand how to engage with the roots. And the people who are at the roots, which is it true? They need to learn how to rise. So you need a mix of those lenses. And I feel really fortunate to have lived at a time when I could play. I could take a lot of risk. I could go live in the Caribbean for a couple of years and work on a sailboat without any phone or anything. They could just kind of disappear off the edge of the world.
I did that for 3 years. It's the same. When I was 20, when I was 19, I was 20. I left for France for 3 years. And I wasn't afraid. There was nothing to be afraid of. Americans weren't hated. It was starting because Somalia happened while I was there, but we weren't I wasn't afraid. There were no guns over there. I was not afraid at all when I lived there. And it was a great experience. And kids can't do, I tell kids about this and they're like, oh, I want to do that. And I was like, no, I wouldn't do that right now. There is nowhere I would go right now.
And that's it. I was in St. Thomas and lived in an unrenovated hotel room on the beach for $350 a month.
Oh, and, perfect.
Now it's about 3,000 a night, but it was nice, and had these experiences that one of the things I really regret about about Austin now is we've lost the ability to engage in discovery. I remember in the early 2000s wandering through East Austin, going into old medical warehouses and finding artists, and you were perfectly safe doing that. Maybe not at midnight, but certainly at noon you were okay. And it was so you could discover it. And I feel like that is, even though there's a huge world to discover, people don't have access to it. You
Yeah,
know, they can't.
you can still wander through those tech warehouses, and
Yeah.
all you find is tech bros, and
Ah,
a lot of overly priced equipment. You don't find any of the usual people we used to go and enjoy meeting in the East
yeah.
Coast.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and that's what I think is the big loss. And part of why I love language is it gives you the tools of discovery. You can kind of hear a word and maybe do a little research on it and find out the story of it, and it leads you to someplace else. Now, unfortunately, if you're not geared towards following curiosity, you don't do that because it's too risky. You can't spend time that way. You have to kind of be hustling for the dollars all the time. And you're not building social capital. You're not building cultural wealth. You're not building those invisible capitals that actually make this kind of what y'all are doing there with Plutopia and what I want to do with Future Story Lab possible. We have to find a way to engage with those invisible capitals and not just always hustle the bucks.
How important do you think it is that Americans learn a second language?
I think it's really important, not just because, especially here in Texas, you should know Spanish or at least enough to get by.
Right.
And but I think that it opens you up culturally. It makes you realize, wait a minute, they're not just here for my pleasure. They're not here just to entertain me. There's a whole complex culture behind it. And when you start respecting other people's culture, or you create some connection, you think about your culture differently too. It's a really, like, in school, when I was in junior high, I took German. Well, I took German because my grandfather spoke German. It's not because in Houston, Texas, German was something you really needed to know, but
Prevalent.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, and then when I went to UT, I took Spanish. And I created my own immersion program back before the internet or anything. It's like,
Nice.
I only listened to radio in Spanish. I only read Spanish language newspapers. I went into places where I was forced to speak Spanish because, I don't know if you noticed, I'm a little intense and weird when it comes to language. But you know what? That stuff still sticks with me. Now, I'm not fluent. I used to be fluent, but
when I went to France, I didn't speak any French. I had taken Spanish in high school, and by the time I left, I was fluent. And I still am, because I speak to a lot of my friends
right.
who are over there, which is lucky. But I mean, like you said, how do you keep that fluency when there is no one to talk to? I mean, that's not a daily thing.
No. And that's the thing, is that and when I went to France, I found that I could get into the flow of the language easily because it's the Romance language, and Italy the same way. And and I have a number of friends that are in Norway and Sweden and Finland. Now, those are hard languages. That's a whole different storyline.
That's not funny.
But what we've aligned around is women's work and entrepreneurship and indigenous culture. So we find a way into that. And so I think and when I was listening to Clubhouse for a while, I went through a phase of listening to a lot of it. I'm like, how fortunate are we? Everybody learns our language.
Yeah.
That
it's handy for sure.
It certainly is, right? And it's and the whole, America as a concept is so culturally important. These are the people that left the homeland and came here. And I look at my own family. The first ancestor of mine landed in Massachusetts in 1621, so 500 years ago, on that side of the family. And you just become part of that fabric. These are the people who, and they weren't poor. They were very solidly upper middle class, and they could have just stayed and continued to live their lives in Europe. But there was something in them that wanted to discover, that they wanted to try something different. And I think that we have those seeds in us,
Yeah, this is, for me, it's kind of weird. I studied 2 years of Latin. I probably had 4 years of Spanish, a couple of years of French. I didn't retain any of that.
I didn't retain anything from school.
And then, like last week on Indigenous Peoples Day, we were with Indigenous people. We went to like a hoop dancing ceremony in Santa Fe.
Oh,
and,
nice.
There's a guy there, Edwin Felter. He was like doing native chants while the hoop dancers were doing their thing. And I was struck with the real power of the language. I thought, this is the language I'd really like to learn. I don't think you can get classes in Hopi or classes in Navajo or Choctaw. Well, you said you had a class in Choctaw.
Yeah, you can. And actually, probably the most advanced language school that you can engage with is a Cherokee language. They've done the most to actually create, language learning tapes and things like that, classes.
How different are they?
They're very different. I mean, it's a different positioning of the tongue. I mean, it's the whole mouth shape is different. And there's a video game. It's beautiful, but it was designed, and it's Inuit, and it was designed for the next generation to actually start understanding the environmental story of language, how it was shaped by their environment. And that's one of the things that is so disturbing about the degradation of environment, is that it created the language. So you're not only losing the language, you're losing the way to engage with it. And so, because it's not just a spoken language, it's a feeling that can't be. So when I remember seeing an article a number of years ago about how fishermen in the Inuit fishermen, they had to change their whole story of seal hunting, because the seals, the environment wasn't giving them the clues that they had before. The sun was setting differently, the water was moving differently. And so there's all these clues from the environment that is a language in and of itself. And so that's what's so hard about the indigenous languages, is that they were so interactive with the environment. And if the environment changes, how do you keep speaking the language? What's your reference point for it?
Ruth, earlier you used a word that many politicians and educators in Texas consider a dirty word. You said diversity.
I knew you were going to say that.
And
you know what?
When that happened, I was speechless, and that's quite a treat with me. I didn't know how to handle that. It's like, what is wrong with diversity? But apparently some people find it very threatening. Why is that?
Well, yes. And I think that it's not just a diversity of culture, it's a diversity of thought, it's a diversity, anything that challenges the status quo. And if you look at nature, monocultures don't survive. We need biodiversity. We need the complexity. I've always found it interesting that complexity and complexion are no.
That's what happens when you inbreed.
Yeah.
Well, he's obviously.
I thought that was someone's Halloween costume.
Oh my
That's
God.
the other side of diversity.
Yes, and so I think that I remember a tobacco ad, like a PSA from a million years ago when I was a kid. And it was a boardroom, and it was all of the tobacco executives sitting around. And they said, "We have a problem. Our market is dying off because what they're doing is smoking," right? And I see that the same way with this kind of the politician-thesauruses that are out there, is that they're literally, denying any existence of meteors, and they're not evolving in any way because they have so much fear around losing what they have, and they'll do this at any cost. And we see that when people are being pushed out of their opportunity. And one of the conversations I seem to have pretty regularly as I talk to the money people that want to back things is, one, they've determined I'm not a communist or a socialist, and that took a long time. And I said, no, I'm a collaborative capitalist. And I think that if you don't want people to be dependent on the government, then you have to give them the tools to produce wealth locally. Seems pretty simple. Put a commercial kitchen in, put a 3D printing lab in, put in the tools they need to actually produce wealth locally. And so that'll solve all your economics problems, and that kind of relaxes them around diversity. Now, it's a very slow go. I've been doing this since 1994, so it's been a minute. Mm-hmm. So, and the resistance is real because they are so dug in fear that everything is a conflict. Everything.
What about just going back for a second to a sort of this semi-censorship question I asked earlier? Mm-hmm. I feel that language is incredibly powerful as well. And when you change words in books so they can mm-hmm. stay in the library at a school, really bothers me. Mm-hmm. I feel like we are going in and whitewashing and pretending that certain words were never said, certain mm-hmm. things were never done. How is that even a thing that you could change art like that? I mean, would you go and like put a black label around a Mapplethorpe?
No. And I think that we're oversensitive to the wrong things and desensitized to the wrong things. It's like our focus is skewed. And so now I do think that, having a Mapplethorpe exhibit at an elementary school is not, I couldn't do that in good conscience, but right. That's a decision made before you sell the tickets, right?
Right.
Yeah,
but it's not. They're not even teaching Huck Finn anymore. I mean, or
yeah.
There are. So I mean, it's like as far as being in school libraries, I think especially in Texas, we have a real problem.
Well, and the trouble is Texas goes, so goes the world, because
exactly,
it's like the textbooks that are approved here flow out to everywhere. I think it's like 75% of the books start here.
Because we make so many, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think about my own growing up, and I grew up in a household where we had bookshelves floor to ceiling, and anything was fair game. If you didn't want it, my parents didn't want to read it because the context wasn't right, it was on the shelf in their bedroom, and that was pretty clearly a no-go zone, right?
Nice.
Done. So, and I think about having, been able to read Carlos Castaneda when I was 10 or 11. But I didn't have any context for it. It was just, a thing. Yeah. And
Don Juan.
Like, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it now. Oh, so
exactly.
But I think that if we have to be able to bring this out to the light of day. We have to say, okay, let's just turn on the light and see what it is. And now let's talk about why this is bothering you. What you need to own the way that you're presenting this. What is your trauma trigger? What's going on here? It's like there's a great book that was written in the early 90s called The Way We Never Were. And it's all about the false narrative of the nuclear family in the 50s. Oh. And it's a really good book. And it's been very influential for me. So The Way We Never Were. And wow. It's this whole idea of, you realize that they propped up this whole story of this clean, well-lighted life where everybody was this, that, and the other. It's like Pleasantville, and that you read that and you start thinking back and going, wait a minute, people didn't just suddenly become something. It's always been there. Your awareness has been raised around it. And once the awareness is raised, you really can't push it back down. You have to find a way to talk it out. Now, Texas, of course, it's what a love-hate relationship for anybody.
I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship myself.
And I say that about Austin. I said, I feel like it's just a bad boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, those are such good ideas. No, we're never going to do them, but you should keep having them. It's like,
won't get off my couch.
Yes, exactly. So it's but this whole idea of, and this is where language becomes so important, is that you have to find that third way. You have to find that way where nobody gets to shut down and say, oh, I'm threatened by it. because once that's in place, that wall is not scalable. They're bricking it up on this side where you're trying to break it down on this side. And so, but what I have noticed is that there's a lack of yielding. There's a lack of two-way respect. And what I may not agree with somebody, but I respect their journey to get to that point, because I want them to respect my journey. And I think where we get into problems is where people validate their journey over yours. Your experience is invalid because you didn't come to the same conclusion. So there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to actually create places where, I call it transacting transformation, where you have some boundary around it, but the agreement is that we're going to keep moving through. We're going to slog through this hard stuff.
This is going to be
worth getting to the other side.
This may be incredibly helpful to repair relationships that were damaged by the Trump years, quite honestly. I mean, I think there's a lot of families and, just families, some friends, but families who need repair on this kind of stuff. I mean, it really, that blew up their lives. They need some reconciliation.
Oh,
I'm in one of these conversations right now in an online community that I'm part of, where people are sort of talking past each other.
mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like they're deciding from moment to moment to misunderstand what others are saying. It said, well, I believe my decision here will be to completely misinterpret what you're saying, and it's hard to communicate in a context where people have decided to, misunderstand you. They've decided to misunderstand you.
Everyone wants to
talking to some politicians.
Well, and I think, John, I'm really glad that you put it the way that they've decided to misunderstand you, because it is an effort. It's a conscious opt-in to do that. And I think that there's a lot of reasons behind that. One is people don't know how to engage. Okay, they think as long as they can keep you entangled, that means you're in relationship. And it's like, no, I'm entangled. That's not really a relationship, right?
Or in proximity,
Yes. And the other is they've lost so much power in other parts of their life. They have to win this thing. They have to say, man, I walked away. And they're not looking at the cost of that. They're not looking at the fact that we, as a people, collaboration has always been the way forward. There was no Horatio Alger was a false story. Let's just put that out there. And this idea of rugged individualism is like, no, thank you. It's never going to. We've seen where it's taken us. Ayn Rand at the end, right? She was digging into government subsidies to pay for her life after she got lung cancer after smoking cigarettes forever. It's like, okay, that personal responsibility thing, could we start with that?
I knew a guy who named his dog Dagny. I know. I was like, why would you? I know what that means.
Yes. And that's it, is that, we have to, and that shows the power of a name, of naming something, of language, is that you're looking at it going appalled, saying, that's not just some name from Sweden, okay? That's like it carries a lot of weight, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so I do think that this is why I'm so interested in the lexicon, and I'm so interested in and like with poetry. Again, until February 17th, I wrote maybe 12 poems in my entire life, and I think 4 of them were in 4th grade, where I had to do it for a poetry thing. It was a while, and so. But it just kept coming and coming, and it was a way for people to reach parts of people that they couldn't express. It kind of activated it, and it's literally, I'm not a fan of either of the George Bushes, but that 1,000 points of light thing is a pretty, that's a great little visual, great metaphor, because it does kind of come together. We do want to, kind of light people up. But we want to make sure that they don't use it to light tiki torches and burn everything down. So there's a fine line, right? And kind of get people out of outrage and get into stewardship.
And so I guess the how would we go about finding your poems and stuff? Is that all on Medium?
Right now, they're all on Medium, and I post them on
Okay.
Facebook. And
Okay.
I have a GoFundMe called for the Awakening Story.
Oh, cool.
Because it was that was so February 17th. And I only knew this looking backwards. So February 17th was the first day of Lent. I had poems come in every day, sometimes 3 or 4 a day, until April 2nd, which was Good Friday. So what it told in that story arc was the awakening of Christ consciousness. If you read them, you're like, wait a minute, there's a whole narrative here.
Wow.
And it was, yes, thank you. And it was really kind of amazing. And then 3 more volumes came out of that. And so it became a whole story about how do you work with the shadow and the light to actually create a whole person. And then the volume 5, which I'm working on now, it's a total of, as of today, it's 143 poems since June 22nd.
Are you relying at all on any Jungian thought or shadow light type stuff?
Yeah. It's I have a lot of experience in the metaphysical space. And I also have always had, like, my first therapist in LA was a Jungian, and so that definitely influenced me, right? And I've always had these amazing dreams, and they're very pragmatic. Like, it's like, call this number. I'm like, okay, I'll call this number. And it's like, because I asked my therapist, I said, so everyone gets, like, interpretive dance and smoke and this and that, and, like, monkeys flying by and waving, and I get phone numbers, and she goes, you have a lot to do. They don't have time for that crap for you.
How
and I was like,
funny.
oh, okay.
That's hilarious.
When you talk about Christ consciousness, are you concerned that people will think that you're like an evangelical Christian?
I've had a few people say that, and I said, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, so Christ consciousness is my lens.
Yeah, me too.
And if you actually read what I do and still think that I'm an evangelical, Christian that is waving a torch trying to convert you, you're not reading closely enough. You need to read a few more of the pieces.
Well, but that's
just
the
so
issue,
many sensitivities about that. People are really like, I mean, on the one hand, actually, I know some people who are evangelical Christians, and they're cool people. They're fine. They're not weird in any way, but there is a lot of weirdness sort of associated with that movement, especially political weirdness.
Well, Christo-fascists are
Christo-fascism.
Okay, that's a pretty and prosperity gospel people are like, I don't get that at all. It's like, I don't remember Jesus was like, get a mega church. I'm so super into it, and just send all your camels and donkeys my way, and
who would Jesus put in cages and shoot at the border? I'm just wondering.
Well, it's like the idea of Jesus hanging out and smoking joints with the moneylenders instead of driving them from the temple.
And that's it. I mean, and the pictures, the stories we've been told, I mean, we have to start literally following the money on that stuff and saying, who's benefiting from this? Who does it benefit to have this buff Jesus to bring all the girls to the temple?
Do you remember that Saturday Night Live skit?
Which one?
It was Lorraine Newman, Gilda Radner, and Jane Curtin, and they were having a sleepover, and the Bible was on, and they were like, "Oh my God, Jesus is so hot! He's so cute, such a fox!" And they would go up to the TV and start
babysitting. Yes, and that's the thing, is that we just have this amazing opportunity using technology to examine this stuff. Literally turning on the lights. That's what technology does, y'all. But we have to have language to express it and to say, okay, what is this really? There you go. Like Jesus, right?
Oh my God, is that Donald Trump?
No, oh my gosh.
You said that you started your writings February 17th.
Yes.
That was in the aftermath of the big freeze. Was that an initiating force there? I have friends who have had the same thing happen. They experienced that and they went and started doing something they'd always been putting off.
That, I don't know if I did that consciously, but I think that had an effect. It was, I was just responding to like these words that I felt compelled to share. And I honestly didn't think it would last this long. I mean, why would you? But same, I've had people that have now created these incredible pieces of art that have never, publicly shared their painting before. And I think a lot of people, and I do think COVID, the crucible of COVID that we all went through, if you didn't come through that on the other side and say, wait a minute, time has completely changed, I need to engage differently, because we don't know. We don't know. And for me, I've lost since the beginning of August. I mean, I've lost a lot of people before that, but since the beginning of August, I lost half a dozen people as of last week.
I'm
and
so
one of
sorry.
whom, thank you. One of whom John actually interviewed on The Well. One of my dearest friends, Mike Rose.
Mike Rose died.
Yeah, August 15th.
I didn't realize it.
Massive stroke.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and he, I knew him since 1987 in LA, and he's an incredible writer about public policy with education and writers. He was a professor at UCLA and a lot. And they had his memorial service at UCLA live streamed from UCLA on the 10th of this month. And then somebody published an article about him in the New Yorker. So it's kind of like every time I try to go like, okay, I've got Mike in line, some other big thing comes up and I'm reminded. And so, I know that there's a whole lot of grief we aren't dealing with, and that's what, because if you take outrage and anger, the other side of that coin is grief. And we as a country and as a people have had so much to grieve. We've had so much loss of identity, and we've had loss of people, and not just in COVID. Yeah, there's Mike.
I feel like we're all suffering from this collective PTSD.
Yes.
I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong to use that term.
No, I think you're absolutely right.
It is a very heavy term, and I just want to be careful with it. But I feel like we've been through a lot as a group of people who clearly hate each other right now, and we're being locked in our homes, and domestic violence is going up. I mean, it just seems like something worthy of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
When you get to a certain age, I can speak from that a certain age.
He's 29.
That's a tough age, I hear.
Times 4. But
oh wow, I'm impressed.
No,
wow, you're looking great.
Times 3.
At 75, I've lost a lot of, most of my family and a lot of friends, and there are a lot that are just hanging on barely. Unfortunately, I'm hanging on pretty well, but many aren't, and it takes some, I guess, spiritual training, I guess, to be able to survive stuff like that unscathed. But I have PTSD on a daily basis because of a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important to bring that up. I mean, because I know people, they're thinking about the winter's coming and they don't know. Like all of a sudden in Texas, it might be horrible. We don't know. We know that nothing has been done to prepare us for it.
No, certainly
Supposedly
not.
it may very well be horrible.
There was a warning from ERCOT that came out today saying, hey, winter's coming. It's like, yeah, y'all should be doing that. That shouldn't be us.
What are we supposed to do? Wrap our pipes?
Right? Exactly. I mean, I was
Get a
without
generator
power for 40 hours.
Yeah, I was out
And-
for a long time too.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
get a fossil fuel burning generator. That'll solve all
Well,
the problems.
yeah, and that I was just thinking that, and luckily, I don't have to fill up my car but once a month, if that. And but I know people that have to, get their kids all over the place, and they have to go to work, and they do all these things, and gas is $3 a gallon. I mean, there's just a lot that's building, and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's and this, we're inviting in billionaires to come and take whatever they want with no cost. And I'm not even going to say his name. I refuse.
Yeah,
because,
John and I were joking on our radio show about Austin is the live Musk capital of the world.
if only it was that interesting.
They've got to send us to outer space.
And Joe fucking
It's the
Rogan.
worst, right?
Ugh.
So we have reached
Well-
the end.
Oh,
the end of
no.
our hour. Can you believe it?
Have to
Ruth,
Oh my
you
gosh,
have to
we're just
come
getting
back.
warmed
There's
up.
so much more to talk about. Yes. Oh my gosh.
This has been super fun.
Yes.
This is a
know.
blast. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh my gosh, thanks for the invite.
Come back
Come
in a
back.
month.
Yeah. Well,
We'll
you know
talk
what?
some
If you want
more.
me to be pick a regular time, I'm there every time. I promise you.
Right on. Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yay.
Sounds
Good
Well,
to
it's
great.
talk
great
to
to
you.
see y'all again.
It was great to see you too. And we really
Yeah.
hate to leave, but
Well, time
we're
being
punctual.
what it is.
All right.
That's all of us. Okay. Bye, y'all.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up
Bye.
with you.
Okay.
Bye
thanks.
bye.
Bye.